Good afternoon, South Australia and Australia, or wherever else you might be tuning in from. Today I have the honour of being joined by Elizabeth Hart from Vaccination is Political. So Elizabeth is an independent researcher investigating the vaccine industry and conflicts of interest in vaccination policy. Elizabeth's website is vaccinationispolitical.net. You can find out more from Elizabeth there, but also very, very active on her Substack, which I highly recommend people subscribe to as well. So Elizabeth Hart, Vaccination is Political. Elizabeth's always, through 2024 has already been on many podcasts, including Graham and John from Club Grubbery, TNT Radio as well, and many other platforms. So I'm really pleased to have Elizabeth Hart join me this afternoon on this New Year's Eve. And thank you, Elizabeth, for giving up your time and coming to talk to my audience wherever they might be tuning in from.
Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Mark. I really appreciate it.
No, most welcome. So, there's so many things to cover, isn't there? I mean, it's been, this last 4 years has been tumultuous, right? And I sit and I'll get these emails coming in. I look on social media and I look at so many blips on the radar that we could be fighting, right? And I'm one of these people that kind of likes to share as much as I can about a lot of stuff. But I think the key thing with you, Elizabeth, is that you've been investigating this vaccination policy in vaccines and started off with pet vaccination back a long time ago. You've got a real clear focus on a specific topic, and there's so many topics where we're being coerced and programmed and so forth. And it's really good to see, to have the insight from people like yourself that nail down a particular topic. And this one is massively important, and I think more people need to be made aware of it. So look, thank you. A bit of a structure. We did talk earlier. We're looking at obviously some key things that you've got for the audience about 2024, maybe some positives that come out of it, because there's been so many negatives over the last 4 years. And in your mind, what's sort of been positive? The other thing is to let the audience know, obviously, some current battles that you think are really, really pertinent, that people really need to know about, the South Australian audience or beyond as well. And then maybe some encouragement or focus for 2025 and beyond, where you see a lot of effort needs to be put in. And then obviously we're going to be talking about your Substack. You've just released, and I'm just going to bring this up again, your most recent Substack, and this one's a bit of a thing with me as well, is Jane Halton. I've been shooting stuff off about Jane Halton for quite some time.
You're a big
obviously
fan.
I'm a big fan of Jane Halton. I'm a big fan of being able to expose her. But anyway, so I actually haven't had a chance. You've pushed this out today. Haven't had a real good chance of looking at it. But you're going to be talking about that a bit anyway. So how about we, I guess, start off with maybe a positive for what you've seen come out for 2024.
Well, 2024, the recent positive, which just blew me away, was William Bay winning his case against AHPRA. I thought that was just, wow, that is just fantastic news. And that's something that we've really got to build on now, because AHPRA, is the center of evil, really. And for him to win his case, and that they have been shown up in the way that they are persecuting doctors and others who have questioned the vaccination narrative. This is just deadly serious now. And we've had that judge, Justice Bradley, sort of pouring scorn on AHPRA and the medical board for how they've handled the situation. So I just see that as a fantastic opportunity now to really go after AHPRA, because AHPRA is just has been a disaster area. I mean, if I can just give you, springboard to my sort of pet subject, which is informed consent. I've been campaigning on that now for literally years. And throughout COVID, I was very concerned that it could become compulsory, the vaccination. This was throughout 2020 and early 2021. And I was writing to AHPRA and to the professional organisations, warning them about this, that you must give credit to informed consent. And multiple emails on this, very detailed. And eventually, in September 21, I got a letter from AHPRA confirming that practitioners have to get voluntary informed consent for vaccination. Now, that's clear and unambiguous in September 21. And this is when the mandate started. You know, we've got Daniel Andrews announcing the vaccinated economy in Victoria. Scott Morrison had stitched up that the aged care workers would have to get vaccinated, and he steamrolled Paul Kelly and the AHPPC on that, and the National Cabinet, that they're medical practitioners on the AHPPC. They should know that you have to get voluntary informed consent, and yet they ditched it for these aged care workers, and then subsequently for medical workers. So they trashed voluntary informed consent, and yet we had the confirmation from AHPRA that they have to get voluntary informed consent. So what should have happened in an ideal world or a proper world is AHPRA should have immediately jumped up when mandates were announced and said, and put out a position statement to the practitioners and warned them, stop, you will not be able to do this. You will not be able to vaccinate people who we know are under mandates. And it was publicized. Everybody knew about the duress that everybody was under, but that didn't happen. So this is the most shocking thing. And we've also got a situation in that my colleague, Emma MacArthur, you know Emma MacArthur, we were watching this carefully through 2021. And in July 21, the Morrison government announced to the practitioners that they were going to have liability protection for administering the COVID jabs. And this was in response to concern about the AstraZeneca vaccines with the clots, because the practitioners were worried about that. They didn't seem to be so much worried about the risk of injury to people. It was more about whether they were going to be protected from liability. So the government gave the impression that they were going to have this specific protection, but it turned out that they didn't. You know, Emma and I talked about this. We were saying, I wonder how they can have that, because they've got an obligation to get informed consent. And so she wrote a letter to Greg Hunt, the health minister at the time, wanting clarification on this. You know, what's the situation with, you know, battery and assault if they do it without informed consent? And she got a letter back pretty quickly in December 21, confirming that the practitioners do not have specific liability protection, that only a vaccine claim scheme was put in place. And this letter from the government made it very clear informed consent should be obtained for every COVID-19 vaccination, just like any other vaccination. Now, that clearly wasn't happening. The government was sending out a letter with that statement in it, knowing at the same time that, you know, mandates were rife throughout the community. That's in 2021. You think of all the mandated vaccinations that have been given since that time. The government is saying that 72.5 million doses have been administered. 72.5 million doses have been administered across a population of 26 million. That's including children. How many practitioners does it take to administer those vaccines? And my main argument now is, sorry, people, there's no valid consent. You cannot get valid consent when people are under duress if they've been told there's a penalty for not complying, which is you can lose your job and you can't participate in society. You can't travel. You can't go to the gym. You can't go to entertainment. This is what happened to people in Australia. So do you see my frustration in that this has been known since 21, and yet what's happened about it? Nothing's happened about it. And this is including, I've got to say, the so-called freedom movement. I brought to the attention of so many people, plus the professional medical colleges and the AMA and the medical insurers and the government, of course, and nothing's happened. It's just going on that there is no valid consent. And I'm thinking, what is going to happen when the penny drops on this? There is no valid consent for what has been done. I just think it's huge. It's like a massive story, and it's international as well. What is going to happen? I mean, what do you think about it?
Oh, look, well, you know, I was caught up in it. And what's the thing? Because even if a doctor, because I'm wondering if a doctor or a nurse had said at the time, well, you're not able to give informed consent, so well, let's not do it. But that person goes back to the employer, they terminated, which is what happened to me in the disability sector, because I was swept up in that healthcare stuff, right? So I chose not to take it, and I was terminated. That was obviously a dictate by Nicola Spurrier, SA Health, and our CMO here. So what was the option? People had absolutely no option all the way through, did they? Like it was either go and get it, even though they're not giving informed consent, or lose your job. But you're right, because a lot of even the package inserts weren't even supplied. So no from what I understand, no doctor or nurse was able to go through the full list of adverse reactions or what could possibly, the best risks and benefits of this product to people when they lined up for these things either. So all the way along the line, it was. Well, I think it's criminal. I mean, people have bandied around criminal quite a bit, but it's nothing. It can't be anything short of criminal, Elizabeth, I think.
I don't think so, because these practitioners who are giving these injections, this is basically mainly nurses, really. Nurses and people in pharmacies and doctors. I'm making the point that these people didn't have a clue what they were doing. They were not experts in COVID. They were not experts in these vaccine products. They were just giving these products. And it shouldn't have gotten to you going to the surgery. It should have been dealt with before anybody went to a surgery or a vaccination clinic or whatever. It should have been dealt with at the leadership of the medical profession and AHPRA before this even happened. They should have said straight away, we will not be able to vaccinate people if there's a mandate in place, because that will violate voluntary informed consent. You cannot give voluntary informed consent if you are under duress. If you're being told there's a penalty if you don't take this vaccine, as in you're going to lose your job or you're going to lose participation in society, you can't give a voluntary informed. You're under duress to comply. You've got so much to lose. This is your livelihood. I've had letters back from the government saying people had a choice. I'm sorry, you're not getting away with that line. You don't have a choice when your livelihood is on the line. Now, some people actually, like you, gave up their jobs, but it should never have been that people have had massive losses. Relationships have been broken over this. Families have been broken. It's caused enormous damage, and it should never have happened. There should never have been mandates. And now we need to go back and unpick this. How did this happen? And I say we have to go back quite a long way. We have to go back to 2015, 2016, when the no jab, no pay law for coercive vaccination of children was put in place. We must go back to that time, because that's when this principle was put in place, when they broke voluntary informed consent for vaccination by incentivizing vaccination and penalties, loss of childcare or whatever. That meant it wasn't a voluntary informed consent. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, children's vaccination, that's essential, you can't mess with that. And I say children's vaccination has now blown out of sight, because the practitioners have been effectively forbidden to question vaccination. In fact, all of us really have been forbidden. It's extremely difficult to talk about vaccination publicly. And I can speak to that because I've been doing this since 2008. And certainly before COVID, it was just about impossible to speak about vaccination. If you wrote to your politician about it, they would just blank you. They didn't want to know. If you wrote to bureaucrats, whatever, it was just simply a no-go area. And so now we have to look at that. How did that happen? This is a medical product. How can we have a medical product that's not allowed to be questioned by the people who are administering the product, as in the nurses or the doctors or whatever? What has happened here? And so this goes back to AHPRA. AHPRA has been threatening practitioners for years not to question vaccination. Any hint of anti-vaccination, and they're under threat of being suspended or worse. And when we know when people are suspended with AHPRA, that means they're out of the job for years, like we've got like Mark Hobart and what have you. So this is what's got to be examined now, the operations of AHPRA. We know that AHPRA is in collaboration with the World Health Organization. And we know the World Health Organization is effectively run by Bill Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And his agenda is to vaccinate everybody over and over again. And so all of this has to be examined now. Before COVID, you couldn't say a word against Bill Gates, the wonderful philanthropist, Now more people are waking up to Bill Gates now with his blocking out the sun with geoengineering and the cattle with the injections
over here and mosquitoes and
and the mosquitoes, and the guy is out of control. But the science and medical establishment has just been in his thrall because he's giving them research funding. So these people will do anything for research funding, and so he hasn't been subject to criticism. People don't criticize him because that's what he's their teat. They're on their teat of his funding. So this has all got to be looked into of how have we got to this. And a major part of this is it's called vaccine hesitancy. And there's a group called the Vaccine Confidence Project, which is, you know, in the UK, and it's headed by somebody called Heidi Larson. She's an anthropologist, but their role is to sort of quash any, any questioning of vaccines, and to just make sure that everybody is going to be compliant. So this has all got to be exposed now. These people have just gotten away with doing what they're doing and protected by the mainstream media. Everybody has, all the sort of institutions have been on board with this stifling of dissent of vaccination. And that's why we've ended up in this absolutely dire situation with COVID, because of all the stifling and shutting down of dissidents before this has happened. Now with COVID, it's like they have just gone too far. And this is the opportunity now. There's a lot more eyes on this now, a lot more people looking at this, a lot more people willing to question it who wouldn't even dreamt of questioning vaccination before this. And so now is the time that we've got to stir this up and bring the government to account and all these so-called regulators and the TGA. You know, look at the TGA. They approve a product, and by them approving a product, we end up with a mandate. I mean, a mandated medical intervention. It still takes my breath away. You know, through 2020, I was in gobsmacked awe the whole time. I thought, I can't believe this is happening. They're able to lock us in our homes, tell us we can only go out in twos, and we have to wear masks. This whole thing, I thought, where are the checks and balances? Where's the legal system? Why aren't we protected? Somehow or other, these emergency laws have been put in place, and they were abusing these and using these. And all of a sudden, everybody was in lockdown, and people were too scared to say anything. They just wanted to be as good as they could because they didn't want to get penalised. So people were terrified. People going into quarantine on the basis of a positive test. You know, this whole test has got to be examined. PCR testing. This is a pandemic of PCR testing. A positive test. People without symptoms getting shut down. People who are at work loving the opportunity to have a week or two off work at home, watching Netflix or whatever, not realising what this was costing them in the future, which is their freedom by buying into this stuff. The amount, you know, you'll share my frustration at the amount of people who've gone along with all this, not really, you know,
and still they're
paying with things with their phone, and they've got no idea what we're walking into here, and their children and their grandchildren. Think about what the future holds here, the big picture. That's what we've got to get more people talking about. But we've had no mainstream media giving any analysis. The ABC has been absolutely treacherous, has given us no critical analysis. The news platforms have been promoters of the vaccine products. There's an industry, the vaccine industry, they don't have to worry about advertising. They have just got the whole system working for them, pushing these products, and ultimately mandates. I mean, you know, it's just incredible. It's just incredible. And if you look at my post today on Jane Holton, I'm arguing that Jane Holton, we can blame her for the mandates, because she called for no jab, no play in May 2020. And so that seemed to set the scene, because that's what we ended up with. We ended up with this entire country under coercion and mandates. Now, some people were able to escape. They, you know, if you were retired or if you were lucky enough to be in some jobs that didn't have these mandates or whatever. But most people with state governments that were mandating these across the board, like Victoria, it was very difficult to escape. And just the peer pressure, if you just wanted to operate, if you wanted to travel, you know, people like you and I, it blows my mind to think about it now, the discrimination that went on in this country. And the vaccinated don't really understand it. They don't understand what we experienced, in that we were second-class citizens. Because they were vaccinated, they could travel, they could go to the theatre, they could go to the gym. But we were barred from that. That happened in Australia. I mean, talk about Anzac Day. There must be loads of these poor soldiers turning in their grave to think of what happened in this country, what people went along with, what our politicians went along with, you know. And I want accountability now. I want these people brought to account. So I'll let you get a word in now.
No. Look, I 100% agree, Elizabeth, and you're very passionate about this, as many others should be as well. And this is the thing, and I guess a little bit of our frustration within our circles, I guess, is the amount of people that are still willing to defend to the death the people that are pushing and promoting this, and back them up. They're still so, I guess, naive to the coercion, the corruption, all the things that underpin it. Because I mean, you mentioned APRA, but we, obviously, and the emergency powers was one of the huge things that really played a big part in this. For them to be able to do that, but you were able to have someone like Greg Hunt get on national television saying that the nation is part of the biggest global clinical trial, and yet in the same breath we had people mandating people under a clinical trial. So that in itself was a massive against the what was it? It's lost my mind now. The Nuremberg Code, right? I mean, a massive. I mean, no one under a clinical trial should ever have been mandated to take anything, these things, and especially seeing people didn't really know all the evidence that was there and about that, because these things historically, and you'd know this better than anybody, vaccines were tested for years, sometimes decades. This thing's rolled out and everybody's just said, oh, okay, no, we have to take it under this emergency power and declaration. And so that's a real worry. So where do you see the role of the NCCET with all that? It was, all these people that were advising government, I guess, and politicians and chief medical officers, because they can all say, we've got an out, right? So I see all your writings, we share email amongst each other for years, right? And everybody was writing to the chief medical officer, or even the politicians, even Chris Picton and others, and all they come back with is that we are following the advice and guidance of all these regulatory bodies, and the TGA has said this is safe and effective. Yet no one wants to talk about the fact that the TGA is funded over 90% by the industry. Now that's, I mean, even that is massive, should be a massive red flag for even the normie Australians that are still saying, oh, maybe it wasn't a bad idea. Don't you think?
I think that what you call the normie Australians aren't going to believe people until we get people within the establishment speaking out. We seem to be, mad conspiracy theories or whatever. We know we're pretty much on the ball, but people, you can understand it. You've got to give these people credence that they're relying on politicians, they're relying on the so-called experts. These are voices of authority that have been very authoritative in telling them what to do. Now look at Nicholas Spurrier. She is, I think, pediatrician. She got called a professor just before COVID, which was very convenient. What does she know about COVID? What does she know about COVID vaccines? And yet there she was laying down the law along with Grant Stevens. It boggles the mind. The entire state was closed down on the back of a few cases. We think about that now. We know. Look how we're all operating now. Everybody's forgotten about COVID. Nobody's carrying, only a few people with masks. You know what I mean? But the whole thing, my position. I'm questioning the whole COVID thing. I don't believe in COVID. Even on the government website, the symptoms of COVID are fever, shortness of breath, cough, and some other, they're regular respiratory symptoms. How does that get designated as a specific disease that's supposed to be deadly? The WHO admitted from the very beginning that this wasn't a problem for most people. That was on the table. And then they give out the mixed messages, that anybody could get it, anybody could die, But that's what the message was really. So how did we end up with this position where these medical officers in Australia and elsewhere around the world were deliberately trying to terrify people? This was public health terrorism. Their goal was they wanted everybody to have this vaccine. That's what the goal was. It was totally incomprehensible as far as children were concerned, as far as young people were concerned, as far as most people were concerned. And then they're openly admitting, the vaccine doesn't prevent infection or transmission. I mean, the whole thing is like some sort of massive test of the people. And I'm afraid a lot of people have failed because it was just out there in plain sight that this whole thing was ridiculous and critical thinking was just out, where was it? Hardly anybody had any, because they were relying on voices from authority. Once somebody's got a name, that title, doctor or professor, people just, you and I don't bow down to this, but so many people do. And this has got to be exposed now, this whole doctor professor thing. I don't buy into it anymore. I no longer use those titles. for most people. There's the odd person, like Liz Evans in the UK, doctor in the UK who spoke out about informed consent. She's a doctor, in my opinion, but they are very, very few and far between, you know? And so as far as all these people who gave these injections, they just simply weren't qualified to do this. They did not have the expertise. Now, we've got to look at this from, look at AHPRA. AHPRA put out a position statement, as you would know, in March 21. This is before the mandates came out. But Scott Morrison had already, well, let's go back to Jane Holton. Jane Holton had already demanded in May 2020 to have a, sorry, something came up on the screen there that sort of just threw me up, you know, no jab, no play. And then Morrison goes along with that in August 2020 and says he wants to see it as mandatory as possible. This is before the vaccines are even out there. They're already saying it's going to be mandatory. And so then in March 21, we get this, they're just rolling out now. They've come out so quickly, they're just rolling out. AHPRA says to the practitioners, get vaccinated, get everybody else vaccinated. Don't ask any questions or you're toast. That's basically what AHPRA was saying. I've actually asked AHPRA who wrote that statement. This is what we've got to start doing now. We have to start getting the actual people's names, the people who did that emergency law, the people who put the AHPRA position statement together. Let's not just have a report and this, you know, we want to find these people, the actual people who are doing this, and hold them to account, and then put the frighteners on other people, that they're going to start being held to account for the things that they are doing, because this has ruined a lot of people's lives and you know, cost us goodness know how much. But that position statement, it's now been rescinded, and I was writing to AHPRA and complaining about this all along. You know, that position statement, we can say now, because in some ways we've got to give a lifeline to these practitioners, even though they've got to be told, you trashed voluntary informed consent. It was your obligation to get that consent. You penetrated those people without authentic voluntary informed consent because you knew they were there under duress. But we can also say that the practitioners themselves were coerced by AHPRA, that they were being threatened by AHPRA. And so it only took a few, Mark Hobart and a few others, it only took a few to get suspended, and the rest fell into line because it was just too scary. You know, if there had been enough numbers, this is the thing that the medical profession now is going to have to do so much introspection into the massive failure, the massive moral failure in that profession, that they all went along with this, that they weren't capable of standing up and saying, this isn't right. We shouldn't be doing this. We should not be mandating medical. It's the most basic thing. How could this even happen? And so this is what's got to blow up now. And we've got to use the William Bay case. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I mean, some people were trying to pour cold water on that case because, you know, they don't like him for various reasons. You know, William Bay is a striking personality. There's no doubt. He'd be the first to admit it. But fair play to that guy. He won against AHPRA. And you know what? He did it without lawyers. That is a massive win. Look at all the cases that have been lost, you know, and I'm really frustrated with lawyers because they don't seem to be taking a damn bit of notice of the argument about informed consent. How come no jab, no play? How come that ever happened? Why wasn't it recognised then that this was interfering with informed consent? No lawyers were involved in all that. How did that law get up? When people said it's clearly there in the immunisation handbook. I quoted it in my submission that I made in 2015. I quoted that and I said, it's clearly in the immunisation handbook that you have to get voluntary informed consent. How can this even happen? But it did. And the AMA has obviously gone along with it. And obviously lots of doctors have gone along with it. It actually happened. It was because of that getting set in place that we've ended up with no jab, no job, and no jab, no. That was the principle that was put in place. So we've got to go back and look at that. How did that happen? But now it is still going on. And I'm really fed up. I mean, of course, adverse events are important. There's contamination. But that seems to be where all the focus is going. It's not going to the absolutely basic thing of people have been injected under mandates that should never have happened. How did that happen? Massive failure. How do we get that addressed? As I said, I've written to the AMA, I've written to the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, the Royal Australasian College of Physicians, I've written to the medical insurers, it's mind-boggling that they keep ignoring this. And I'm thinking, this is going to be some sort of massive negligence case, because you can't say you weren't told and over and over again. And how can you keep ignoring this?
Yeah.
So it's very
Yeah.
frustrating, Mark.
It would be. And I reckon the reason they it's been ignored because you're one of a very small amount of voices for over a decade and longer fighting this. You know, there's been people that have been pushing back on this for decades, like yourself, that were in the minority, and these people are so well cashed up. We know the pharmaceutical industry is $1 trillion, industry, and it's hired people, like you said. It's employed people to be able to shut down debate, ridicule anybody that wants to speak out on it, because it's such a massive thing. And this is the same with when COVID hit and all these so-called experts come out and said, you've got to follow the science, trust the science, because there's been a lot of suppression. You know, this whole media is another thing. You know, the people that control the media and the information flow. So there's been all of that. So it started with even the 80% or 90% of the population almost became our enemy, because they were following obviously along, because they didn't know any better, because the people behind this have played the book so well over the decades to put all this in place. So the reason that it's got to this, when, like you were saying, is that not enough people or not enough voices have been there to be able to push back on this legislation, these policies, these things that have been put in place. Because most people are kind of, I'm paying off the mortgage, I'm going to work, I'm going to go away for the weekend, I'm going to have a holiday, I don't care about politics, I'm just going to rock up at the ballot box and I'm just going to elect this person, and then they forget about being involved. But I do sense a little bit of a shift now where, people like you becoming aware and your voice being shared and others. I think there just needs that critical mass where enough people start sharing it and talking about it and paying attention in regards to regulation and legislation. Because if enough people push back against these mandates, this no pay, no play, or no pay, no pay, and they realise that it's all a massive fraud, because the people that have made massive profits out of it have been behind the messaging of safe and effective. And because, look, we've got no liability, we can do whatever we want to, and plus we're funding everybody, right? There's no one's liable or accountable. And I'm with you, Elizabeth. I'm really hanging out for some really serious accountability, because that's not what happened. And you're the same with the court case. And I say credit to William as well for getting this APRA thing up. And I hope it's that snowball, it starts ticking along, because our courts have miserably failed us. Even Stuart Lindsay admitted that, in a certain extent when I talked to him. Massively failed us in regards to, and even, we're talking about King's councils and everything. This massive cost to bring these cases to the courts. And here's someone like William Bay that's had support from others, and he's obviously had some legal advice along the way. That's just gazumped APRA massively. And I think we need to, like you say, continue pushing on that. But this informed consent is a really big thing, because, everybody's got caught up on that, right? It should have started from the word go. And
yeah.
And I was just going back to a comment that Sal, it was quite a long one, sorry for putting that up while you were talking, but she was saying that it's been horrific, but most vaccinated people agree with us now, she believes, but slow to discuss it publicly or make any declarations. I think they're either ashamed or scared, and there's only a minority of your vocal jab advocates now, I think, that are really pushing. They're the ones that agitate things. But I think there's a lot of people that have a lot of regret about this now, and hopefully we'll jump on with others now and start pushing back about these policies and this legislation, because that's that's the only way we can do it, isn't it? I mean, there needs to be enough people of critical mass to say, no, we're not playing with this game anymore, and we need to see changes in our political system, or people that actually write these policies in place that can censor a doctor to the point where they can't give informed consent to a patient. Now, that's just ridiculous. It's definitely got to change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, firstly, with the legal system, I mean, here we are supposed to be in a free country, and that we had a legal system that did not protect us from mandatory vaccination. That is just mind blowing. If it's supposed to be a legal requirement it's like they didn't realize. Oh, think about it, people. The practitioners, the people who are actually giving these injections, they have to get informed consent. It's like didn't seem to be known about in the courts or in Fair Work. That wasn't seem to be considered at all. So there's courts. These people are highly paid judges. They have completely let us down. They're a disaster area. Then we've got the fact that this has been a no-go area for years. That I know, I can personally speak to, that this has been suppressed. There are lobby groups. SAVN, Stop the Australian Vaccination Network, which was set up in opposition to Australian Vaccination Network with Meryl Dorey, and Friends of Science in Medicine. People like Sue Araki and Dave Hawkes and Patrick Stokes and John Cunningham. These have been self-appointed people who've taken it upon themselves to shut down other people who wanted to question taxpayer-funded vaccination policy. I know this from personal experience. I used to try and comment on a website called The Conversation, which you may be familiar with. It's a research sector website. It's got a connection with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Surprise! Who hasn't? You know, I was commenting on that. This is because I started with pet vaccination, as you said, back in 2008, and it was because I was compelled by that. And we actually had a lot of success with pet vaccination. It was in Choice magazine. It was clearly seeing that they were over vaccinating the pets. It was a money-making racket. And it was by finding guidelines for pet vaccination that this is what's one of the things that really drove me, that in pet vaccination, they were recognizing we have to reduce vaccination of pets to minimize the risk of adverse reaction, because they were jabbing the pets every year. Now what's happening in human vaccination? They want to jab people every few months. It has gone completely insane. We need to be able to talk about this. And so we're successful with pet vaccination. So then I got interested in human vaccination. And I started commenting on articles, say, on The Conversation. But now I look back and I see this whole area was completely closed down. There was a clique of people who dominate this area. People like Raina McIntyre and Jodie McVernon, and these sorts of people. There's a clique of them. There's a whole clique of these people, Ian Fraser. And they've got it all set, closed down. And then people, members of the public like me, who were making, I was putting on, you know how I write very carefully. I'm making careful arguments. I was eventually banned by The Conversation, that I could no longer comment on the articles. This is taxpayer-funded vaccination policy, and this research university sector website took it upon themselves to shut me down. They were doing it with people all the time. They would have riders on their comments, how they were monitoring this, and you have to comply with all the rules. And they did not want anybody saying anything against vaccination. It has just been so closed down for years. This Friends of Science in Medicine, SAVN, they patrol all these things. They would come and they just like bully you into silence or just get you censored. That's what they were doing. Patrick Stokes, you probably heard of him. There was a famous article on The Conversation, No, You're Not Entitled to Your Opinion, which is based on Meryl Dorey. I think it was a story that was on Media Watch, and it was about measles outbreak and what have you. Anyway, they use this story that, people who are outside the establishment are not allowed to question things as far as the likes of Stokes is concerned. Now, at that time, that was 2012, I was still a bit of a green skin with this. And I just went on there innocently, just putting in my little bit and, still not really sure what was going on here. I was talking about the measles vaccination because at that time I thought one dose might have given full immunity. I'm questioning all of them now, I've got to say. Anyway, I went on there, and this pile-on that was going on this comments, that everything's closed in. The Conversation, ABC, it's all been closed down. That you're not allowed to question vaccination policy. And we've got to expose this now. That's because of all this silencing that's been going on for years, that we've now ended up with this disaster with COVID, which I still hold is not anything like the thing they've made it out to be. And yet, look what it's cost our economy. Look what it's cost our society. Look what it's done to politics. Look what it's done to the medical profession. It's a major, it's probably the biggest scandal, I would say, in history, because it has affected the whole world. And we have to see now who has benefited from this. Who made all the money out of this? Because we're in a lot of debt, and it went sky high during COVID. And we have to look at who is responsible for this. It's huge. And another big issue to look at with the vaccination schedule is conflicts of interest. There are a group, ATAGI, Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, who are responsible for this policy, for making policy of what's going to get recommended for the schedule. Who are these people? I wrote to Tony Abbott back in 2015, wanting transparency for the various groups that have all this impact on policy. I didn't get exactly what I wanted, but I did get some information on ATAGI that was disclosure. We got some disclosure, and we could see that people on ATAGI are often involved with the vaccine trials, or they're getting funded to go to their meetings and what have you. And that's what we want. We want transparency. We need to know if these people have got any vested interests in this. That was put up there. It was not enough information, but it was up there. There was some information up there. The big problem with it was when it changed, there was no history. They would just put up the current members. This was important because you need to know who were the people who approved the HPV vaccine, for example. That was gone. And I was writing to Butler in recent times saying, there needs to be more information. Now we've got nothing. They've taken the whole thing away, taken it all away. I've written to Russell Broadbent about this, asking for his help to get this sorted out, because they're all throughout COVID, we've had no proper transparency for ATAGI, for the people on ATAGI. And I know they've got conflicts of interest. I know that it needs to be up there. It needs to be clear. So this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a totally corrupt system that is not working for the people. We've been exploited, and we've got to shine a light on this now. We've got to get enough people behind us to find some people in the establishment who've got balls, shall we say, to come out and stand up for this and do the right thing, because it's a disaster. And children, it's horrifying to think of the amount of vaccine products that are being given to children now. It is huge. The general public has no idea. And about the repeat vaccines, there's aluminium in a lot of these products. I have been bringing the issue with aluminium vaccines for years. That's a story. That's a program in itself about what's been going on with that, because a Cochrane group said that there wasn't a problem with these aluminium adjuvant vaccines, but that systematic review they did was rubbish. It was rubbish, and I have written to them, and I have written to Cochrane, and there's nothing being done about it. And that review is being used to back the safety of the aluminium adjuvanted vaccines on the schedule, and yet that review is rubbish. You see what I mean? I wrote to the chief medical officer years ago. That was Chris Bagley. That was years ago. I've written to Christine McCartney. They ignore you. They just simply will ignore you. This is what was particularly happening before COVID. Anything on vaccinations, they're not dealing with you. They just treat you like dirt. So we have got to find some way now to get the spotlight on this and really blow it up.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it's coming out more and more now that a lot of these scientific journals are also captured and corrupt. And from what I understand, they've put there's a lot of, let's say there's argument for something, an argument against. They would end up publishing more documents of it in towards the narrative that they wanted to, which is obviously supporting vaccination and all that. And some of the other articles would just not get published or whatever, or get sidelined. But you also mentioned about academia as well. There's a lot coming out about that, about almost like cheap PhDs now and stuff, because a lot of the universities and that are so captured in that now as well. So we were talking about the credibility of academics, and even some good quality academics are pushing back on that now, saying it's almost putting their PhDs, making it laughable, because they're just given out really easily now. So there's a lot of that actually coming out now. But coming back to, because Sal mentioned something about that, she put a comment in saying about how she took an immunization handbook into a doctor, but a lot of the doctors were actually just go along with it and brush it off. So they would actually physically, even if a patient went into there and said, look, I've heard this, I've read this, I'd like to know more about it, they say, look, don't worry about it, or they brush them off or make them feel bad or ridicule them. And people would go to the doctor just for a normal checkup, and they'd say, oh, by the way, have you had your vaccine? So they were really pushing all this as well. So the whole, even though APRA was pushing it, there was a lot of doctors that actually willingly went along with, well, okay, this is what you need to take it. And I remember talking to Bruce in a couple of episodes. Our good friend Bruce, Bruce Pay, was mentioning that a lot of the doctors, because when he went through medical school and all that, there's very little time spent on vaccinations, so they actually rely on the pharmaceutical industry reps and so on, and the industry to give them guidance, and they kind of go along with it because they're not taught to investigate or research vaccines themselves. So this whole it's sort of like a massively captured system, and then for doctors not being able to at least give their patients proper informed consent just based on the fact that they don't even have the knowledge to be able to do that.
They don't have the knowledge. I mean, I mentioned to you Heidi Larson before, the Vaccine Competence Project. How's this for an amazing coincidence or timing? In December 2019, she presented the plenary lecture at the WHO's summit on vaccine safety. Hello, this is just before the whole COVID thing comes out. So I was following this at the time, and I transcribed her whole lecture because it's just full of gold. And she would probably get a pretty big shock that somebody did this and has now got it, to quote. So one of the things she said in this lecture, she admitted, because she was saying, we're losing the doctors. I'm paraphrasing now because I can't remember exact words, but we're losing the doctors. She said she was aware that people are asking more questions about vaccine safety, and we're losing the doctors. So this is very interesting to think about in December 2019, because they're planning to lock the doctors in now to give these injections. And she also says, she admits that people are lucky to get half a day on vaccines when they're getting the hello. Can you imagine that? Those products, there are so many different products. These people do not have a clue what they are doing, what they are injecting into people. And I'm out there now. It's taken me 16 years. I was very, very careful when I first started. Over vaccination of pets, very carefully. Oh, too many vaccines, repeat. I'm out there now as poison. I'm looking at the whole lot as being poison that they're injecting into people. It is totally unnatural, the stuff that's being injected. I'm not buying into it anymore. I want the whole schedule looked at. And I'm saying that I really think what these people are doing, they've really got to think about what they're doing now, because we know there's so many chronic health problems. We've got people across the board in society are so over-medicated with so many products, antidepressants and proton pump inhibitors and steroids, and it goes on and on and on. That the doctors are basically the sales force, the captured sales force, police force even, with the vaccines, to push products on people constantly. It's just, they've got it set now. You will have this vaccine, you will have this, when you turn a certain age, you should be getting, whatever you call it, the statins and what have you. We can't rely on these doctors anymore, because this is one of the things I've argued, and I've put that paper together, Misfeasance in Public Office, and this is what I've written to the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, that I'm saying that this is conflicting with the Constitution. I'm saying that they've been conscripted. The medical profession has effectively been conscripted to put out these vaccines and it doesn't mean that they're being forced to give the injections, but they're being stopped from questioning vaccination policy. By not being able to question vaccination policy, what doctor now or nurse can speak freely to somebody about vaccines? They can't do it. This is what William Bay was arguing, that he was trying to get free speech back. But there's supposed to be a relationship between the practitioner and the patient. That is the relationship. Now the government's come in on that, and it's just taken over and has made the doctor and a nurse an agent of the state. They're simply there now. They're not using their intellect or whatever. They are now just being used to prescribe these products, to give these products. It's super, super serious what is going on. And we've got to be able to talk about it. It is really scary. And another thing that's really hit me with the William Bay thing, and people were up in arms about William Bay. Oh, he's come out, he's just been totally over the top about the whole thing. We've got to be very, very careful, because the poor doctors might say something and it might get done over by AHPRA. And I say, well, it's about bloody time. I could use a stronger word there. It's about bloody time the bloody doctors and nurses stood up and spoke out. It's all about the doctors protecting themselves. And it's the doctor-patient relationship. Well, how about the patient-doctor relationship? And put the patient first. And when it comes to vaccines, it's not even a patient. These are people in society living their lives. They weren't sick. They weren't looking for a medical product. They've been called upon by the government, not just called upon, ordered to, come in front of a doctor and nurse and get injected by doctors and nurses who themselves have been ordered to give the injections without question. What is set up? It's a disaster. It's just so bad. You could not make it up. It's so bad. And
not a bad business model, is it?
Well, we've got to get this out in the court of public opinion, but we've been hindered that we're relying on you. TNT Radio, we're relying on them, and they're gone now. We haven't got many ways to get it. We have to do it ourselves on Substack or whatever. We're just lucky where we can get this out there. because we've got no accountability. I've tried going to my MPs. Worse than useless is a compliment. They are useless. Jack Batty's my local MP. I thought he might be useful, but he's turned out to be not much cop. And Jane Stevens is my federal MP. Totally and utterly useless. These people are sitting there collecting nice salaries, and they are useless. When you want them to help you, they're useless when it comes to the crunch. What do? We've got no representation. And something that struck me recently, and all that palaver was going on with Charles was here, and he's getting challenged in the Parliament. And I realised these people, when they go into Parliament, they're giving an oath to the King. They're not giving an oath to us. They're giving an oath to the King. But that's pretty significant to think about when you think about Charlie Baby being wrapped up with the World Economic Forum. You know what I mean? This is pretty interesting to think about now. So where does it actually say that these people are working for us? This is a controversial subject, and I'm not absolutely sure what I think about it, but I'm leaning towards questioning compulsory voting. It's not that they can make you vote when you're in the booth, but you have to go up and get your name struck off the list. But I say that this is perpetuating the system. We've got a two-party system. People are being compelled to vote. They go along and they're rusted on, and they'll vote for the same old, same old. So we're getting stuck with the same old people. It's hard for new people to come up because these parties are so established. If they were ever real, they've been taken over now by cuckoos. Like both parties are basically working for the WEF and whoever's behind the WEF, whatever. It's a uni party. So, and these parties also get rewarded with elections. They get paid. I think they're both getting about 20 odd million bucks for the votes that they get. So this system is really locked in that we can't ever win against this because we've been compelled to vote for our own demise. And this has to be cracked open as well, that we need to talk about this, about how this system is working. In the UK, for example, Keir Starmer, otherwise known as Davos man, because he loves Davos, he's the prime minister of that country. The actual vote that the Labour Party got, 20% of the vote. Now, however that, I haven't had time to look into all those seats, but however that seat business works, they called it a landslide or something that won this. But when you actually looked at the vote of the electorate, the people who could actually vote, only 20% of those people voted for Labour. There was a huge chunk, I can't remember now, it was a really big number, who didn't vote. And they don't even seem to get counted. They just get pushed aside, and they don't count them when they're sort of talking about the percentage of the vote. And yeah, that's a huge number. And it's, why aren't those people voting? Why do they feel so disenfranchised from the process that they're not participating? So this means that Starmer, who's doing, as you would know, all sorts of crazy things. England looks like just in a terrible situation at the moment. And it looks like Rishi Sunak is another bloody WEF guy. It looks like the Tories just handball this to Labour to take their turn to operate as the uni party. That means that 80% of the people didn't vote for that government. That's a disaster. And they're doing all sorts of things that are really affecting that country. Look at the sort of the migration that's happening without the consent of the people, without the resources to deal with the influx that's coming in. All of these sort of issues. And you've got a totally unreliable government who you now highly suspicious of working for other vested interests and not for the people. We're all in this together. As in, we know Klaus Schwab has boasted that they penetrated cabinets. Greg Hunt was the strategy director of the World Economic Forum before he got into the Australian Parliament. And other people like Claire O'Neill, Andrew Bragg and Andrew Charlton, young global leaders, Sarah Hanson-Young. So our parliaments have been infiltrated by fifth columnists, basically. Did these people disclose this to the electorate when they stood for election? Did they make it clear that they are associated with or follow the principles of the World Economic Forum that wants everybody to be happy and own nothing? This is the sort of stuff that we have got to get out into the public domain. We need it out in the court of public opinion. We're dealing with a lot of people who don't know this stuff. We can't always blame them because they have been kept in the dark and they have been talked down to by voices from authority who have misinformed them and disinformed them. They are the people who should be held to account for what they've done, not the likes of us being blamed for that sort of thing. So, we're in very interesting times, and that's what we've got to, in 2025, we want to see a big turnaround on this stuff.
Oh, absolutely, and you're right with the voting stuff. I've talked about it myself when I call them the Quad Party, because Labor, Liberal, Nationals, and Greens are kind of like the Quad Party, and it changes backwards and forwards. And it depends on the media. Depending on who's on the nose more, and that they swap between the major parties, which doesn't leave a lot of room for up and coming parties or up and coming independents. And you're exactly right, because they get a certain amount of money per vote, and we know that the major parties, they almost go into the elections knowing they're going to get this pot of money at the end of it. So they're happy to invest millions of dollars in their advertising campaigns with the mainstream media, with social media and all that, because they know they're going to get that recapped at the end of it, because they've got a proportion of that money. Whereas the local independent that's really trying to push back against some of this stuff, or the smaller parties, they're up up against it to start with, right? So, and this is like, you're right, because a lot of people don't know the system very well, and they don't understand it. And so, and the other thing with that is that you have a lot of activists within those parties that get out there and they run up the numbers for them. So the small independents or whatever don't have the amount of people. But I think that needs to shift. Like you're saying, what needs to happen in the new year is, we've got the Aligned Council of Australia, which you're aware of, when there's supposed to be 1.8 million people that are part of that, with their campaigns. It's really just people on the ground joining groups and working together to push back on the narrative of the major parties, the whole globalist kind of agenda, and support up and coming candidates or smaller parties, to sort of give them a platform and do that, and hold the other guys' feet to the fire. So you touched on there about 2025. So so for you, the key battle then is this informed consent, and really agitating this information about, okay, well, we need to break through I guess the political system. We need to break through getting more doctors to speak out. So how do we actually, in your mind, how do we actually do that? Where do we start with starting to unpick this whole legislations and all that? That's kind of put everything in place to get us to where we are. What's your key message then for people to focus on, to fight?
Well, as you would know, I have been bringing this out about Scott Morrison, so that I'm making that a
Mm.
key point, that in June 21, Scott
Mm.
Morrison wanted the aged care workers to be vaccinated. And the public at that time, when everybody was taken in by the whole COVID thing, they might have thought, oh, that seems fair. They should be vaccinated. They're looking after the old people. They should be vaccinated. But everybody is entitled to informed consent. So this is a big problem. And so he brought that out, that he wanted them vaccinated. And it was announced by the ABC that he was going to try and convince the National Cabinet, and he really wanted to roll Paul Kelly, because Paul Kelly and the HPPC at that time had said, we don't support compulsory vaccination. So that was on the 4th of June. On the 28th of June, it's announced by National Cabinet it's going to be compulsory for the aged care workers to be vaccinated to keep their jobs. On the 29th of June, it's announced by Paul Kelly and the HPPC that it is now mandatory for the aged care workers to get vaccinated to keep their jobs. It is now clear that this is not a medical decision. This is a political decision. And there we have the major failure. One of the first major failures is that Kelly and co went along with it. They should have said, we can't support that. We've already said we can't support it. We can't do it, because they were medical practitioners, and they should have known you have to get informed consent. And so if it's mandatory, you can't get informed consent. So I'm saying now that was a key moment, that opened the floodgates to mandatory vaccination, because subsequent to that, Kelly and the HPPC then put mandates in place for medical workers and other disability support workers and other aged care workers that were working in the home. And that broke it. You've either got voluntary informed consent or you haven't. You can't have it for some people and not for other people. And this is, again, going back to the children's no jab, no pay law, but also for medical people. They've been told for years that they have to have certain vaccines. Now, again, people might think, of course they do. They're dealing with the public. But once you start looking at all these vaccine products, it's a sort of different ball game. And that's what's got to be looked at now. And the fact is, with those medical people, being subjected to mandates themselves, it meant they simply did not understand voluntary informed consent for vaccination because they were already going along with it being broken. So this is what's got to come out into the open. Now, even people like Jared Rennick, he was supporting, he was there finding people and all that sort of thing. But back in the day, a few years ago, he was even supporting the idea, medical people, yeah, well, that's all right, they should get it. But no, that's a major problem when you say that. You're supporting the status quo there. No, they should not have to get it. Everybody should be making an informed decision. If the vaccine is wonderful, if it is safe and effective, people will be queuing up for it if they need it. But in a lot of cases, these vaccines are being given for things that don't need. HPV vaccination, that is a huge scandal in itself. That's one that I was really working on before the COVID debacle broke. That should never have been put in place, HPV vaccination. That is a huge scandal. That was actually rejected by the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee back in 2006, 2007. It was that's when Abbott was the health minister. Howard was the prime minister at the time. They were going to the 2007 election, and it got rejected by the PBAC. Within 24 hours, that was overturned by Howard because he wanted to announce this whole vaccine. It was, Ian Fraser's God's gift to women, and to look like they're doing this great thing, and there was lobbying going on. And so then you end up with this product on the schedule, making lots of money for pharma. At that time, it was 3 doses, I understand, of aluminium adjuvant vaccine being given to these children. And I'm saying they shouldn't have had it. It just shouldn't have been given. It was not necessary. That people were told lies about this whole thing, and it's got to be exposed. That, again, I won't go into the detail now, but I'm just flagging it. That is, the meningococcal B is another one. I've got my own specific ones that I pick out, but the whole lot have to be looked at. The whole lot, because we haven't had transparency for this process, because there are conflicts of interest, this all has to be exposed now. And going to the, up there with Gates and Co., the fact that Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have had so much influence over international vaccination policy, this has got to be looked at, with the Gavi, CEPI, like I've just sent out today, the World Economic Forum. This has been going on for years without scrutiny. And now we have to have scrutiny. COVID has got to bring it right into the open. And what's been going on in the US with Operation Warp Speed and all of that sort of stuff, the US is at the heart of this because they mandated vaccines for children in schools for years. And there was this idea of exemptions. Oh, some people might be able to get exemptions. Well, I've argued that as well. No, there should not be any exemptions for vaccination, because you're supposed to be giving informed consent. So how can you get an exemption for something you're supposed to be giving your consent to, or declining if you so wish? The exemption thing, I've been writing to the government about that. They just won't even touch that, because I think that's just so hot to handle, because they're going to have to admit, this is something that's been going on for years that shouldn't be going on. That's what's so tough about this. And it's the doctors and nurses aren't going to want to know about it, because they're giving injections to children every day, Hep B at birth. What on earth is going on there? The 6-in-1 shot at 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, the amount of product that has been given to these little babies. And here's the key thing. Those doctors and nurses do not really know about the product, do not know about the diseases, and they have been forbidden to question the products. Because if they question them at all, they will be called anti-vax and they're at risk of being suspended. Gets back to AHPRA. So AHPRA is a disaster area. We know now that Anne Tonkin, who was the chair for years, she's walked since the William Bay case. Fletcher, Martin Fletcher, I think it was, he was the CEO for years. He probably saw the writing on the wall a while ago, and he handed in his papers a little while ago, and he left in December. That AHPRA now has to be gone over. These new people have come in. They've got to be apprised of the fact of there needs to be a major clean out here, because that organisation is a disaster area. I mean, should it even be there? Now, I really recommend to you, if you haven't watched it already, to watch that discussion between Ahmed Malik in the UK, the doctor who was suffering with, the regulators in the UK. He's the surgeon. He's in, I've had chats with him a couple of times. And that discussion that he has with William Bay is solid gold. There is so much information for people like us who are into this nitty gritty that is absolutely valuable discussion, and it's a must watch because it's just full of, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's really it's going to be really tricky still moving forward. I think 2025 we want to be optimistic. We're working towards it, but even I got pinged the other day, and I thought, well, I'll try and put some stuff. Try and attempt to put some stuff on YouTube again. I put the Stuart Lindsay one up there, which wasn't really controversial. Discussing the William Bay thing, and they flagged it straight away and took it off, and they've put it under medical misinformation, disinformation. So these big platforms are controlling this to a massive extent still. We've got X, obviously, that we're able to get a lot of information out. We've got Rumble, and I'm streaming this to Facebook as well, and so far been okay, but again it's been suppressed. But it's really important, for I think it's ADH TV we talked about TNT radio, and I really hope a funder comes up and brings that back. That was doing some really quality work. So part of this whole being able to unpack this and allow this to be able to be percolated through the community is actually getting voices like yours out there. And actually, I've got a bit of a platform, and it's not huge. You've got Club Grubbery with Graham and Lada. They've got that bit more, and there's others, but it's nowhere near the extent that the mainstream media and YouTube and others have this massive platform. So one of the battles that we will continue to have is trying to get cohesive, well-researched voices like yours into the community to be able to encourage people to to ask for change, because this is what needs to happen. Nothing's going to change until there's this critical mass that says, no, we actually do want to change. And if it's not going to happen through our courts, if it's perhaps not going to happen through our political system, it really needs to happen at one person at a time and at the coalface of the community. So is that do you see that still as a bit of a battle for us in coming into 2025?
I think I see a sort of combination of things. I mean, you've heard of Edward G. Griffin. You've listened to Edward G. Griffin? He's been around for years, 90 years old, and he's been warning about this for years and years and years. And I remember watching him with Ahmed. He had a chat with Ahmed. He said, you don't need all these people. You don't need 100% of the people. You only need a small group of the people, 5-10%. Whatever. You get a 5-10% on the ball doing stuff. Don't worry about the rest of the people. They'll turn. The flock will turn as more stuff comes out, because they need voices of authority to be sort of like to enlighten them. But just we do what we're doing. I think for me, I want to hold the feet to the fire of the people who are accountable. They are accountable. So I don't need millions of people behind me or that. Just to do that, get it on the record, and sort of do that. So that's what I think is really important. That's what I see. And as for those platforms who are shutting people down, people have been telling me they've been trying to share my Substack articles on Facebook and what have you, and it gets taken. Well, these platforms are going to have to start thinking about themselves. We got RMIT, these fact checkers. Who are the fact checkers? Now we sort of say, I don't want to know about fact checker. I want the name of that person. I want the name of that person. Who are they? What are their qualifications? What gives them the right to decide what gets published and what doesn't? Let's start holding that, and their institutions like the RMIT and the same platforms. Who are they? We've got the misinformation, disinformation bill where the government was putting on the platforms that they would have to make the decision of what would get shut down. The government could say whatever it liked, and the mainstream media could say whatever it liked. But no, they were using that as a way to shut down our voices. Well, these platforms, I think I'm going by memory here with Nuremberg, but I think media can get into trouble if they are suppressing vitally important information, preventing it getting out to the people. So these platforms need to start thinking about what they are doing by suppressing information that people are trying to share. And it's already all the lies that with the Hunter Biden laptop and the Russiagate and all that sort of stuff. Media like the New York Times and all that sort of stuff, which were controlling the message, and whoever owns them, because the corporations basically running the show, or whoever's behind them. But in this, there's a lot of people out here, apparently, billions of people, and they might be a little bit pissed off. They start finding out that they've been lied to and that information has been suppressed. All these people that, we were saying, they don't know this stuff. The ABC, what a treacherous organisation that is. Taxpayer funded, complete failure. Ita Buttrose was the chair of that place when, with COVID. That woman was out there promoting the antiviral on commercial TV. I mean, you couldn't make that up. How can that happen, that the chair of the ABC would be promoting these products, that no critical analysis is being provided by the ABC? What a disaster. area. I mean, I used to watch the ABC avidly years ago. It was the go-to place. And then since in the last 10 years or something, it's just become unwatchable. It's become like this little propaganda machine. You know, watching it through COVID, and I was watching it to sort of see what was going on, and the commercial channels, the way they were used to drum, it was non-stop coverage of these people being told to go and have their tests and to wear their masks and to have their vaccines. The whole news service was taken up by this stuff. It's incredible to think back on it now, what they did to us, the complete lies they told, and what they did to people. It's humiliating to think of what people, how they abused people, how they, that's the government that's supposed to be serving us, and yet they were ruling us. They have accountability for this. Find out the specific people who did these things. What was going on with Nicola Spurrier? What gave her the right to be doing this stuff? What expertise did she have? And Grant Stevens, for that matter. They were closing down the entire state. They closed down the borders in this country. But going back to Morrison, he's my top guy I'm after, because he was the one who wanted the mandates originally. He backed away from it then, but he was in National Cabinet. What was going on in National Cabinet? That was federal and state in there, and the territories. They were the ones who cooked this up with no scrutiny. Wasn't going through the Parliament. They were cooking this up, and they've gotten away with it so far. Well, now is the time to put the spotlight on that National Cabinet. Apparently, we can't get the paperwork from them. They were making decisions that were impacting on the whole country. The international border was shut down. We were imprisoned in this country. You know, we can all go back and say, you imprisoned me. I was hostage in my own country. You were able to lock us up because a person might have a positive test and not even have any symptoms. It's insane what happened, and it's got to be brought to account. So, that last one, the post before this last one I put out was the Liberal Party, about the Liberal Party, and I'm actually questioning, is the Liberal Party itself accountable for this? Scott Morrison was the leader of that Liberal Party, just that party. He's then in power as the Prime Minister, and they are exercising the most incredible power. They are spending the most incredible amounts of money, and there's no accountability. And all these people, those people in the universities, and people like Catherine Bennett, these academics were out in the public domain demanding people do this and demanding. Who are they? Who are these people to be saying you've got to do and impacting on people's lives? Just some academic knocking around in a university. This has all got to be, Adrian Esterman in South Australia, who just had an absolute mask fetish, who just wanted to mask the whole time, telling all this stuff that was coming out, how we're all going to get sick and everybody's going to die. And you know what? It didn't happen, did it? So these people were putting out the most incredible disinformation. When are they going to get held to account for what they did?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's still people defending them to the hilt, because he only just put a post out which I had a comment on, and I copped quite a bit of backlash from his supporters about challenging him, because someone posted about not wearing a mask, hadn't worn a mask or been vaccinated, it's fine, and because he's just apparently got COVID and was telling everybody about Paxlovid and what his treatment protocols and all that sort of stuff. And
got COVID.
Yes.
How many vaccines people? We don't know what injections have done to people now. We don't know if these injections have made people vulnerable to things now because they've been repeatedly injected. We don't really know what was in these injections. It's just amazing that they were able to actually make all these injections. How did they even get all the ingredients for all these billions of injections? Are they all actually authentic, or were there a whole lot of placebos out there that, the main thing they wanted to get done with COVID was the principle that people would be injected on demand. That is the key thing they wanted. And the fact that they injected children when it was clearly out there, because children are at risk of these respiratory ailments. Respiratory ailments, traditionally, it's the older you are. They're people who die with it most often. So, and they were admitting, I've got this on the record as well. I've written to people in the UK about this. Again, in 2020, a Lords committee, there was a presentation to a Lords committee, and it was Peter Openshaw, I think his name is, from Imperial College, of all places. And they were admitting that children were being vaccinated against flu to protect the elderly. And they were planning to inject children against COVID to protect the elderly. And this Lords committee didn't even bat an eyelid. Like, Are you kidding me? What society would sacrifice the young to purportedly give some protection to the old with the product that you don't even know? It's just insane. You do not vaccinate people to protect other people. If they need to be protected, you find a thing that works for them, whether it's a vaccine or product or whatever. I mean, I'm questioning the whole vaccine thing now. I'm really questioning this whole mass population medical intervention be given to all these different types of people. This intervention to purportedly, the whole thing's got to be looked at, and we don't have people who are objective and independent in this area, because it's just been completely controlled by pharma and Gates and what have you, and any dissent has been shut down. It means that we do not have people who are really qualified that we can rely on to discuss this subject. You know, you've got the no virus people, and I don't get into that personally myself. I look at the thing and say, I'm looking at the schedule and I'm thinking, there's a whole lot of diseases on here that are not the big deadly threat that they're being cracked up to be, but they are people who are insisting that you get vaccinated. I mean, I'm a measles survivor. Oh my goodness, survived. and I'm questioning how serious this whole thing is. And yet we need to be able to talk about it. In a free society, we should be able to talk about this, but we have been suppressed. And now we need to be bringing to account the people who did this, who deliberately shut us down. People like Friends of Science and Medicine and SAVN, who worked assiduously to shut other people out. Well, how could they do that? You know, when you think about that no jab, no pay, there was a hearing in 2015. I think it was November 2015. That hearing was run by Richard Di Natale. He was the Greens leader at the time, and he was a former doctor. And he was very pro SAVN and Friends of Science and Medicine. So he's running this hearing, you know, while he's a politician, senator. And so this is totally biased from the get-go. And the people who are the main speakers are, on the one hand, Meryl Dorey and the AVN type people, those sort of people. So they're looked on as the nutters. And then on the other side, you had the voices of science, and that was SAVN and Friends of Science and Medicine, who just happen to be doctors, or, you know, Hawkes was a virologist, Araki's an emergency doctor. They're not experts in vaccines. It wasn't a target that was there. It wasn't experts of that. But because they've got the titles, they became the self-appointed arbiters of the science. And so this is what happened. That hearing then became the basis to be able to put this law through. It's an absolute farce what is going on. And that has got to be revisited as well. You know, this all gets lost in the mists of time. Well, some people haven't forgotten. Yeah, and it's like, this has got to come out now.
Yeah.
Because
and you've got receipts.
Well, this is why COVID happened, because we were suppressed. We should never, it's a medical intervention. It's insane that people were forbidden from talking about it. And so all the people, what I want now is I want a big fight. I want a big fight between the doctors will say, oh, we were just doing what we were told, blah, blah, blah. And then, blah, blah, blah. And then Kelly can say, oh, well, National Cabinet made the decision to put that mandate in place. Ooh. You know, to get all these people arguing amongst themselves. You'd have seen that post I did just following orders. This is what we, all these order followers. And because people have been so trained not to rock the boat, because they are under threat of losing, you know, these people are often in comfortable jobs now. They're cushy, comfortable jobs. It's like they're well paid on purpose to keep them compliant. And the threat is there. If you rock this boat, you're going to lose this cushy little number. So that's the problem that we have. We've got these rule followers in the legal system everywhere, worried about their future career prospects and all that sort of thing. And so everybody's just keeping stum on it. And here we are. We have people who have the guts to come out and say, like the Emperor's New Clothes, are you kidding me? This is insane. You cannot have mandated medical interventions. What the hell? And yet all of these people went along with it. The whole thing has got cleaned out. That parliament is a disgusting mess. The parliaments, I should say, state parliaments, federal parliaments, look what they allow to happen. So Peter Dutton, people like this, all part of this stuff. They've all got to be looked at. Peter Dutton, he'd have us all banged up. You know, he was really nasty, the anti-vaxxers. These people, the way this anti-vaxxer term, get rid of it. It's not it's not professional to be calling people anti-vaxxers. I'm entitled to question any medical product I choose and any vaccine product. Do not be calling me names to sort of shut me down. Who do these people think they are? They have
especially bureaucrats. Yeah, especially bureaucrats and politicians, because they've no right to be able to. That's just all political. That's a shutdown term anyway, as
Yeah,
you know well. It's just really just to shut people up like yourself that are challenging, challenging them for their credibility at the end of the day. And Sal even mentioned here, she's got a bigger cultural issue. Aussies went along with all this. The evil compromised leaders only have the power we give them. Have we ever stopped being a prison colony? You know what I mean? Like so.
mm,
It works better. So this is a message to people to stop listening to, start researching yourself, have an open mind to what's going on, because there's so many topics they're trying to affect our health in every single way. And the key things that I picked up from there is obviously is freedom of speech is critical. We've got to be able to be doing stuff like this where your voice, someone that's been researching this topic for over a decade, needs to be out there. And I'm pretty sure that you're happy to challenge anybody that's happy to have a decent, robust conversation with you about what you're saying.
yes.
But let's make it open and honest. And obviously the other thing is that fully informed consent is having every single Australian being able to have the information that's provided to them via free speech. So having your voice against someone else's voice, and then have them have the ability to provide full informed consent about what they choose to take. And you nailed it on the head, because before about vaccination, I mean, they were talking about protecting you, or taking this drug to protect grandma and others. Generally when you take stuff, it's for your own, you're taking it for your own safety and benefit. It shouldn't have anything to do with someone else. So if you're, say, working in a nursing home, and the person in the nursing home has been provided informed consent to take something they choose to, then they should be protected, even if you've chosen not to take something. And this is where it all comes down to.
But this is a key thing. That Lords Committee in the UK, there was Arnie Akbar, I think, he was admitting that vaccines don't really work in the elderly because they don't have a good response. So this gets to the question of, let's go back further. Okay, so the World Health Organization was admitting from the beginning that this wasn't a problem for most people. Let's start there. And I've got a B&J rapid response that was published in March 2020, where I'm questioning what is happening. March 2020. If this isn't a problem for most people, why was there a vaccine solution? That is where we need to go back to. There should never have been a vaccine solution. None of this should have happened at all, because there shouldn't have been a vaccine solution to a disease that wasn't a problem for most people, and certainly not a vaccine solution that got imposed on everybody, certainly imposed on the wretched, richer countries that were being milked to pay for all this stuff. There'd be lots of poorer countries where this didn't actually take off, but it was the richer countries that got milked. And as I have put in that article today, forgetting about that article, Jane Holton, do you want to know who the biggest investors in the vaccine industry? Do you want to make a guess?
Yeah.
Our governments, that's who it is. Our governments are the investors in CEPI. So our governments are investing, and so they're investing in this industry. So what do they need for this industry? Fodder. Us. So what's going to happen now with the Moderna factory that's been set up in Melbourne that's putting out 100 million doses of respiratory vaccines a year? Who do they think is going to have them? Because I don't think a lot of people are going to be queuing up for these vaccines now. That's why we've got to make sure we're on top of this mandate issue right now. We get this turned around in that we are now after them for what they've allowed to happen. And I said, I'm going after Morrison. And that the Liberal Party, you can see in that post, I wrote to the Liberal Party years ago. I wrote to John Austin, who was the federal president. Here's your little Liberal Party. Well, this is where it's all coming from. They've given the platform that Morrison's using, and now he's the Prime Minister of Australia because people voted for this Liberal Party. But did people vote for this? The Liberal Party, which is supposed to be, following liberal values. And here we had Morrison locking us all into the country. And people, the thing is, there are a lot of people who still believe all this. They believe that Australia kept the vaccine out because we closed borders and all of this sort of stuff, that they think is successful. And same in with McGowan in Western Australia and all this sort of stuff. This whole thing is a stitch up. And it basically comes down to whatever you think, nobody should be compelled to have a vaccine and be threatened that they will lose their job if they don't have it. And that goes for the practitioners as well. They should not have been threatened that they would lose their job if they questioned what was going on. So I will give that to the practitioners, that they were coerced into this as well. But still, it becomes now about how do they judge these people going to medical school? How do they evaluate them? Because I'm thinking, do they evaluate these people as being rule followers? You know, do they not want critical thinkers, that they want people who just follow the guidelines, follow the guidelines? So the guidelines can often be written by pharmaceutical companies. You know, it's like, what happened to a vocation? Are there people out there, nurses, people who wanted to, who care for people and would really just wanted to be a nurse or a doctor because they wanted to care for people? That was their primary, not because it's status and money, because this is a vocation for me. I want to do the best for people. I must start feeling that that's why people go into medicine. I just feel like it's a status job and it's a money job. Are there people who are genuinely caring about people? Because if they were, now, okay, a lot of people could be taken in by this whole vaccine thing. There definitely are. I said it's taken me, I've got to allow the fact it's taken me 16 years to get where I am now. I wasn't, I bought into the whole thing at the beginning as well. But over the time, you know, I have changed my opinion, and I'm now looking at the stuff that's being injected, you know, aluminium in vaccines, fetal bovine serum in the MMR, all these things are being injected to people. We don't really know what the reactions can be, and all of this sort of stuff. And it's not studied objectively. We know, you know, people have been saying with the COVID vaccines, they'll say, oh, there's been so many more adverse event reports than with the traditional vaccines. And that really gets on my wick, because there's an awful lot more vaccines being given with COVID, because just about everybody was being pushed to have them all the time. With the traditional vaccines, they've just been given periodically to various age groups. Plus, these little kids can't speak. So when they've got problems wrong with them, it might not be associated with the vaccine. We do not have genuine post-marketing surveillance of vaccines. You know what I mean? The TGA does not want to know. The TGA is funded by industry. It's not going to bite the hand that feeds it. We know we can't trust the TGA. They were behind people being giving incentives to have the vaccines, donuts and ice creams, and also it's just TGA. Yeah. What they're doing now, because it used to be you shouldn't have been advertising products. What they do now is they they advertise the disease. So you'll see an advertisement for meningococcal B, and it's talking about the disease, and then it will say, "See your doctor," and then when you doctor, people don't realize, you know, these doctors, a lot of them are getting training from the Immunisation Coalition. The Immunisation Coalition is in bed with the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. The Immunisation Coalition is funded or sponsored by Moderna and Pfizer and Glaxo. And so these are the people, this is where the doctors are getting their continuing education from Immunisation Coalition, which is funded by industry. You'll see people like Paul Griffin, professor or associate professor, whatever he is, Paul Griffin, you know, Queensland University. He's out there pushing the vaccine products all the time. I don't think I've seen him disclose the fact that he's with the industry-funded Immunisation Coalition. Same with Robert Bowie. Same with Raina McIntyre. There's all these people, that these professor types using their titles to promote vaccine products, but not clearly disclosing that they're also associated with industry. Conflicts of interest, you see? So this is why we have to give a lot of leeway to the public. You and I have gotten into this because for various reasons that affected us. But there are lots of people, I would have been just like them. For the bizarre thing that happened to me with my dog, you know, people have said this to me, cannot believe this. You had a problem with dog vaccine, and now look what's happened where you are. You know, that happened to me. If that hadn't happened to me, I might have just as well gone along with all this as well, because I just had a certain experience. And so lots of people did not have the experience. People have got lives to lead, children to look after, mouths to feed, incomes to earn. They are expecting that, oh, if that chief medical officer is telling me this, and if that prime minister is telling me that, well, that's what they're paid to do. That's what it's not my job to do these things. I'm relying on them. If they are pushing this so hard, you know, they knew when the vaccines, we were talking about vaccines earlier on, they could gauge the population that a lot of people weren't going to have the vaccine. They could sense it, that people were hearing it's not that bad and that they weren't going to do it. And they were trying that persuasive thing of, you've got to do it for everybody else, you know, if you've got to do everybody else. But people weren't buying it. And that's why they had to put the mandates in place, because they knew. So we've got to give Australian people a lot of leeway here. They had the free choice. A lot of people wouldn't have had it. And we also have to think about the amount of people who betrayed us. Look at the Australian Army. They were involved in this rollout. So this whole conscription argument can be used for so many people. The legal system was conscripted. The medical profession was conscripted. The army was conscripted to all support this narrative. And they were all told. Can you imagine any of these people questioning stuff? Lyndall Dean, when she questioned it in Fair Work, she got sent off for re-education. I mean, you could not make that's amazing. You could not make that up. That's like something out of, Soviet Union. This whole thing is insane. Looking back on it, when you look back on with people, when I remember that when you weren't allowed out of the house, you were only allowed to go out in twos. When they were doing this, you wouldn't be able to talk to each other, and the way everybody was bought in. So many people were genuinely terrified because they've been like jizzed up with Contagion movie and Outbreak movies and things like this. But when you look back now, it's just this whole idea of a killer virus. It's so theatrical and everything. But I'm just keeping something in my back pocket here, because if they have done something to people by injecting them all with this stuff that makes them open to something, that's the thing people should have been afraid of. Not the virus, or whatever it's called. The needle going in the arm. That is clear and unambiguous.
Yes.
That's gone in your arm. And when and you can also look at this with, sexual consent, penetration. It's the same principle with this injection. It's penetrating. It's injecting a fluid into you. This is the same principle. And that did the person clearly give informed consent? And I've got people who say to me, I did give consent. I did. I signed the form. They told me this, that, and that. I said, no, you could not have been given. First of all, you're under duress of the mandate. So that's it straight away.
Yeah.
Plus, these people who are giving the injection do not know about COVID. Who does? And they do not know about the products. They're not quite. And the argument I'm like there is with the Rogers versus Whittaker argument, that's the case that underpins informed consent generally in Australia. And that was a case where a woman had a problem with her eye, and she went to an eye specialist, and she had the operation. To cut a long story short, turned out badly. She ended up blind in both eyes. And she eventually won the case because he hadn't told her of all the things that could go wrong. Now, there's a situation where this is a woman, an individual who had a problem, going to a doctor herself of her own choice, and he's a specialist in eyes, and it goes wrong. With the vaccination, we have mass populations being told to go and have this intervention, which they might not want or might why, and being the person they're going to see is not an expert in it. It's terrible. It's a terrible mess. But because it's gone on for so long now, because it's relevant to all the vaccines, you really have to think about all of the vaccines now. All of those practitioners would be saying, why am I giving this vaccine? Do I know anything about it? They're following government guidelines. They think they can trust the guidelines because experts have put the guidelines together. But that's as far as it goes for them. They're just following the government. And they know they can't question it, or they'll get hammered by APRA. And they don't know who is setting these guidelines, and do the people who are setting the guidelines have any conflicts of interest? You see, and that's what they don't know. And they're not people aren't just thinking, wow, gosh, these people are getting a lot more vaccines than we used to get when we were a kid. You and I have gotten by our lives without HPV vaccination and meningococcal B and all sorts of things. I mean, chicken pox, for goodness sake. All of these sorts of things that people used to get as minor ailments, and they've all been made out to be deadly things now. We've got to find a way to insist that we must now have a whole revision of this area, because it's been dominated by vested interests. Dissidents have been shut down. It's a disaster. APRA's a disaster. The medical profession's a disaster. The AMA was calling for mandates. They were calling for mandates for medical people. The Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, these organisations themselves, like, what's wrong with these organisations themselves that they are so bad that they don't realise about informed consent? It's like everything's got to be cleaned out and built up from the ground up.
Yeah, 100%. That was the same with the disability industry, the advocacy agency for disability, same thing. They pushed for mandates. My ex-CEO was on the board of that and pushed for it for the industry. So look, it's huge, isn't it? So and going back to the vaccines and conscious of time, because we did say we're going to have now, and it's easy to get away because there's so much to talk about. But you know, Dr. Paul Thomas, I often share his stuff about, you know, he's got this evidence of vaccinated versus unvaccinated families, and the massive evidence there for him for the health outcomes of unvaccinated children compared to vaccinated children. He's done that, Dr. Paul Thomas, but lots of other people also sharing the graphs of prior to vaccinations being rolled out, how a lot of the diseases that we're vaccinating against were actually on a really sharp decline because we actually improved our health through, you know, hygiene and lots of other things. So all these diseases were actually on a spiral down, and then they kicked in the vaccinations from there. So look, it definitely needs to be investigated. And I know if you were part of it, but I'm just sharing this to inform me for people that want to obviously get informed as well. I'm not sure if you were had much to do with that, but that's an Australian thing. I know that Dr. Judy Williman and others have spoken into that. So if people want to obviously follow that, you know, have a look at that, because it really is critical about this being informed, this informed consent for the public to also start looking at educating themselves, because we can't just, I guess, expect things to change by changing governments or changing bureaucracies and everything else like that. We you know, people need to be the driver behind that. We have to be the driver in regards to everything. They represent us, and we have to hold them to account, which is exactly what you're talking about, is holding people to account. So look, I'm just conscious of the time. Really appreciate what we've done. I'd really love to be able to have you on again in 2025 and beyond for you know, because there's just so much to unpack in this. And if you're willing to kind of give the audience you know, specific information about specific things and deep dive a bit more. But what I say to people, who have been listening, jump onto Elizabeth. You know, your website's there, Vaccination is Political, but ultimately you do a lot of work now via the Substack, Elizabeth. So I encourage people to obviously follow that and subscribe there to follow along. So
that's
you know,
a free Substack, so you know.
Yeah. So don't put anything behind a paywall. So look, if you've really valued the information that Elizabeth's brought today and the discussion that we've had, really encourage you to continue into 2025 to follow along, follow Elizabeth. I know you're not on socials a lot because you do such a deep dive and you dig into this particular topic so much that you focus on getting all your research and putting it up on your Substack and your website. But if people want to have a look at historically, all your emails are on your website, or you know, they can go through all the emails, all the receipts. You know, I talk about this a lot, about the emails that I've sent and everything that I've got, all the politicians and bureaucrats that I've copied in. We have all these receipts. So if anybody wants to turn around and say, and particularly you've done this a lot longer than me, if any politician or bureaucrat wants to say, oh, we weren't sure, or we, you know, wants to obfuscate from their responsibilities, no, I'm sorry, you don't get that excuse, you don't get that option, because we've been holding you account. So I really thank you for everything that you're doing, you know, on behalf of South Australians, or all Australians really, and anybody that might have been watching from overseas as well. And I really just wish you a very, very merry, good new year, and really be following along what you're doing as well. So thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Well, the same to you, Mark, because you've done so much as well. You've been a real stalwart through all this, so well done you. So we just try our best and just get the information together and just hope that we can bring more people with us. We just need to get some people behind us and just hold those people, their feet to the fire, the ones who are accountable. Make them realise that they are accountable now. We're after them.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's not going to go away. If they think they can just like turn around and say, oh, you know, we made mistakes and it, you know, wasn't that great and we could have done better. Sorry, that's not going to wash. So no, good on you. I'll be joining you in that fight, and I'm glad to be in the trenches with you as well. So have a great new year, Elizabeth.
You too. Thanks, Mark. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Take care. Thanks everybody for joining us today.
Bye.